We'll start by adding our first orbital, and that will be the 1s orbital, which we know is a sphere shape. To that orbital, we're going to add an electron. And notice when I added that electron, in these boxes over here on the right-hand side of your screen, one up arrow appeared. I'm going to add a second electron. And now with the addition of that second electron, a down arrow appeared. I'm going to add a 2s orbital. Notice again the sphere shape for s. We're going to add some electrons to the 2s orbital. Notice with that additional electron, an up arrow appeared in this box next to the 2. Let's add a second electron to the 2s. And a down arrow appeared in that box on row 2. We're now going to add a 2p orbital. Notice the dumbbell shape or an infinity sign of that p orbital. We're going to add an electron. And notice over here, an up arrow just appeared in this first box of this set of 3 here. Okay, so I'm looking at row 2 and this first box in the set of 3. I'm going to add a second electron. Uh-oh, I'm getting an error sign on the screen. And it says all existing p orbitals must be in place and have 1 electron before filling an orbital with a second electron. So me trying to add a second electron to this existing p orbital, this green one, can't happen until I have all of the 2p orbitals in place. And so that's exactly what these square boxes represent. Each one of these square boxes is an orbital. And these 3 boxes that are clumped together, those represent the 2p sublevel. And inside of a 2p sublevel, there are 3 copies of 2p orbitals. And so that means I'm going to have to add a second 2p orbital. And now I'm going to add an electron to that 2p orbital that I just added. And look what happened here. We now have 1 up arrow in that second box. I'm going to have to add the third 2p orbital. We're going to add an electron to that p orbital that we just added. And you guessed it, an up arrow appeared in this third box of our clump of 2p orbitals. Now, remember, each sheet can hold 2 electrons. So that means I can go back and add a second electron to each one of these green 2p orbitals. Okay, just added another electron. And look here, a down arrow appeared. Let's add another one. Oh, and here is another down arrow that just appeared. And finally, let's add another electron to that last p orbital. And there it is. There's that down arrow that just appeared. So there are some things that I can take away from this, is that each one of these boxes represents an orbital. It represents one of these electron cloud shapes, these three-dimensional regions where we find the electrons. The arrows represent electrons. And inside of one box, I can have up to 2 arrows, and that's because one orbital can hold a maximum of 2 electrons. And anytime I have 2 electrons in an orbital, represented with arrows, we're always going to have the first one pointing up and the second one pointing down. They have to be pointing in opposite directions. Another thing that I noted is that we started with the 1s level, and so we started on that first energy level and we're building our way up. Another thing I noticed when I got to the green dumbbells, the p orbitals, there are 3 copies of the p orbitals. And so each one of these boxes represents one of those copies of the p orbitals. And so when I write out p orbitals, I have to draw 3 boxes because there's 3 copies of them. And remember the way in which we filled them. We had to put 1 electron per box as up arrows, and then we had to go back and do the down arrows, your second electrons. And that is a rule that we have to follow when we're making these diagrams. When our boxes, aka our orbitals, are clumped together, like for p's, you're going to have to first do up arrows, 1 per box, and then if needed, you go back and do down arrows. So let's just keep on going for a little bit longer. Now that 2p is full, I know the next thing in electron configuration is to move to the 3s orbital. So let's add a 3s orbital. Notice the sphere shape, and it's a little bit further away from that nucleus. We're going to add an electron to the 3s, and oh, did you catch it? Here it is, that 1 up arrow inside of this box that's labeled on row 3. Let's add a second one. And then that down arrow for the second one appears. 3s is full with its 2 electrons. Now the next part is 3p. Let's add a 3p. And I'm going to go ahead and add all 3 copies of 3p because I know that the p sublevel has 3 copies of those p orbitals. So I just added all 3 p orbitals. Okay, and so when I write out these boxes, I'm going to have to write 3 boxes for the p sublevel every single time. And now let's start filling them. We'll put in an electron into the first p orbital, and notice the up arrow that appears. I'm now going to add an electron to the second p orbital, aka that second box, and here it is, that up arrow has appeared. And then the third one will have to go in the last box. And there it is. Okay, so I'm going to pause. Let's reflect here. We're filling in the third energy level, which consists of a 3s orbital that contains 2 electrons. And then I move to 3p. And for 3p, I have to draw 3 boxes because there's always 3 copies of p orbitals. And when I fill in the electrons, I have to do 1 electron per orbital. And those are represented with these up arrows in each one of these boxes. Then if I need to add additional electrons, we'll go back to the first box and put a down arrow as you see here. And then I can keep on going if needed, if I need to have more electrons in the atom.